Hello, Amplify Nursing listeners. This season, we're trying something new, partnering with our Penn Nursing magazine to bring you additional content inspired by the stories they highlight in the spring edition of the magazine. We hope you enjoy the crossover of conversations with guests interviewed for both the magazine and the podcast, as well as additional content and context with new Amplify Nursing guests.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa DiDonato.
And I'm Marian Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn Nursing podcast supported by the Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm.
I think it's a shame that the administration is willing to play games with the lives of the women who volunteer to serve this country and just do an outstanding job doing so. It's political posturing, and in my opinion, that has no place in the military and it has no place in healthcare.
Today on Amplify Nursing, we talk with Dr. Kat Russell, a U.S. Army veteran, nurse, and current postdoctoral VA fellow with the National Clinician Scholars Program at the University of Pennsylvania, researching perinatal and reproductive health and healthcare access for U.S. active duty servicewomen and veterans. In this episode, we discuss Kat's journey from serving in the Army, working in a fast-paced emergency department, to then researching gaps in reproductive healthcare for servicewomen. With Dr. Holly Harner, Kat is developing a secure and anonymous online resource to educate servicewomen on reproductive health resources. Their project, Camo Care, is supported by Penn Nursing's Innovation Accelerator and is set to launch soon. They aim to navigate evolving policies and ensure military women have the knowledge and access to care they need.
Hey, Kat, thank you so much for talking with us today on the Amplify Nursing podcast.
Hi, Marian. Thank you so much for having me.
To begin, you have a really interesting background. You served in the military, you are a nurse, you're now doing some research at Penn Nursing. I'd love for you to just give us a little background on how you got into the military and how that brought you to what you're doing today.
Sure. So I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and I'd been looking at joining the military before that, but my family is kind of the classic split camp between New York City and Philadelphia. So after 9/11, it was important, I felt, to join specifically the Army, and I was lucky enough to get an ROTC scholarship, and I went to school up in New York City. And then I served for 7 years in the U.S. Army as an officer. And, I got to deploy twice to Afghanistan. I had some incredible experiences. I met some lifelong friends. But during that time, I started to notice that the healthcare that I was receiving and that my friends who were women were receiving was a little bit subpar, for lack of a better word. And there were some situations where there were very predatory male providers who were in positions to provide women's health care. So as I kind of came to the end of my time in the military, I was trying to think of what's going to be my next career step. And I'm very fortunate that I have my Aunt Patience, who I'm quite close to. She was a Navy veteran. And when she got out, she became an emergency department nurse. And she thought it would be a great match for me. And I thought that she was right. And as I was transitioning out of the military and getting ready to enter nursing school, I found out that I was pregnant. And I'd just gotten back from Afghanistan maybe 2 or 3 months before some of my first prenatal appointments. And when I kept asking, hey, I was exposed to burn pits, I was exposed to this and that, everybody was telling me, well, there's no research on that. Or they were asking me, wait, women don't serve in Afghanistan, what are you talking about? So that kind of motivated me to think about what I could do about the research gap, although I didn't know what it was called back then. So I started nursing school, and I had some wonderful mentorship from my faculty there, especially, Dr. Zamorowski, who basically told me you should go get a PhD. And I was like, wait, nurses can get PhDs? So That was kind of how I came up with my long-term career plan of spend a few years in the emergency department to get the adrenaline out of my system, go into women's health because that's where I wished I had had better nursing care, and then go on into research to address the health issues that women serving in the military faced.
And how do you think your time in the military helped the work you were doing in the ER as a nurse, or do you think it did?
Oh, absolutely. The emergency department is always a very adrenaline heavy. You have not as much guidance as some other specialties. You have to make quick decisions. With triage, you're figuring out what's an emergency and what's not. And when you're coming from a combat environment, or I was a paratrooper when I was in the military, meaning that we, jumped out of planes using a parachute. And
That's super badass.
it
Just
was,
saying.
yeah, well, my knees and my back don't think anymore, but when you're an adrenaline junkie, one does what one can. So I think that yes, 100% military service, if you're looking for a career in emergency nursing, it sets you up for success. You're used to rapidly changing conditions, working quickly, keeping calm in crisis, and just, getting through your shift. So it was, my aunt was 100% correct. It was a wonderful transition for me.
I'm just curious, was there an option for you to stay in the military and be a nurse in the army? And was that ever a consideration?
So I did look at it at that time. Unfortunately, they were downsizing the nursing corps at that point. They were also doing that with physicians and other healthcare professionals. The DoD had about a 15-year slimming of the force with medical and nursing personnel as a cost saving measure that they're now reversing course on because they've realized it's caused a lot of access to care issues. So I did reach out and try to see if there would be the possibility of me doing a branch transfer at that time and, going back to school, getting my BSN, and then becoming an Army nurse, but they were not interested. So I was ready to go.
Do you miss being in the military?
There are some things I miss. There are many other things I don't miss. I miss some of the camaraderie. And I miss some of the clarity of the work we were doing at that time. I am happy that there have been strides made in jobs available for women that were not available when I was in, such as serving in combat arms. But I'm also pleased that I now have work environments where if I have a conversation with a married man, people don't assume that we're trying to have an affair.
And so I guess in the work you're doing now, though, you're still focusing on the military. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into the research area that you focus on now around access to care for women in the military.
Sure. So I went to Penn for my MSN and became a women's health nurse practitioner. And at that time, I had some really excellent guidance from Dr. Wendy Grube and Dr. Jamil Nadalong Ramos, who were the heads of that program. And they were very encouraging of my interest in going for a PhD in research. So I was extremely lucky that when I applied to the Penn PhD program, I was accepted and I was part of the COVID cohort. So we started in September 2019 and then COVID hit obviously a few months later. And what I was looking at that time under the supervision of my co-chairs, Dr. Rosemary Palomano and Dr. Ann Titleman, was perinatal mental health in women service members and veterans. And the reason I was interested in that, and I still am, is because there's so much stigma surrounding mental health in the military and the veteran community that, especially when women are becoming new mothers in the military, it's a tough path to navigate because you aren't exactly encouraged to have a family in the military. There is not a lot of support for it at a systemic level. Again, policies have changed. It's gotten much better. There's now protected breastfeeding policies. There's parental leave. So it's better than it was when I was in, but with mental health, especially coming back from Afghanistan and just seeing some of the situations that Afghan children were in and then becoming a parent so quickly after being exposed to that myself, I was interested in the mental health outcomes. And obviously, while I was in the program, you know, the Dobbs decision came through and abortion access was limited. So as I started my postdoc with the National Clinician Scholars Program at University of Pennsylvania, I was fortunate enough to get a grant from LDI, and I was able to start looking into abortion because when I was in, although I did not require abortion care, I had soldiers who needed abortion care, or I had the spouses of my guys who needed abortion care. And this could range from sexual assault victims, which when I was in, it was before the Shaheen Amendment was passed. So rape and incest were not covered by military health insurance. Or, I remember a soldier's spouse who had a very desired pregnancy, but at 20 weeks found out that the baby was non-compatible with life, unfortunately. And they were forced to pay tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket for that procedure, which, they made maybe $1,200 a month. So I was pretty aware of the inequities that already existed. And with Dobbs, I was concerned that it would get worse because what a lot of civilians don't realize is there's no such thing as freedom of movement in the military. It's all about mission readiness. So what I heard from a lot of people is like, well, they can just do it on their own time and their own dime, not realizing that service members are limited by mileage passes, which means that you need your leadership's permission to travel more than, say, 50 or 100 miles from your base. So if you're in Texas, where the nearest abortion clinic is 500 miles away, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle. And because I had that lived experience, I thought that I could cut through some of the red tape and engage in more community engaged research on this topic and have some credibility because this isn't something that, most service members or servicewomen like to talk about. It's highly stigmatized. So I was just very fortunate to be in the right place in the right time, and people gave me opportunities to deal with this research question that I feel strongly about because even though I've been out of the military for quite some time now, you never stop wanting to take care of your people, and the military are my people.
And that research work has led you to a really interesting innovation project that you're doing with Dr. Holly Harner at Penn. Full disclosure, I run our Penn Nursing Innovation Accelerator program, and Kat and Holly were winners of the Accelerator last year. So can you talk about the project that you're working on and how that aims to help women in the military?
Absolutely. And again, we really appreciate the opportunity that the Innovation Accelerator through the Penn School of Nursing gave us. We applied with our preliminary data that basically indicated most service women and service members were unaware of the policies surrounding reproductive health care access and specifically abortion, which holds true with what I experienced. I don't remember ever getting any training on the policies that were in place. And our numbers were indicating that upwards of 80% of servicewomen didn't know these policies. They didn't know that they didn't need their boss's permission to get an abortion. They didn't know that certain kinds of abortion were covered in the cases of rape, incest, or sometimes if the mother's life was endangered, or they thought that if it's covered when the mother's life is endangered, that includes things like, the prolonged miscarriages where there's still a fetal heartbeat and people go into sepsis. And it doesn't actually cover that. It's very limited criteria. So we took the data and we applied to the accelerator with the idea that we wanted to build a non-DoD, non-VA affiliated education and information hub. And coupling our nursing expertise and experience in women's healthcare, we already knew what resources might be of interest to service members who were either trying to access care for themselves or their spouses or their children. So those are things like, how do you identify a crisis pregnancy center that gives fake information? How do you find a legitimate abortion center? How do you get a medication abortion? What are the policies that are in place? If you are a victim of military sexual trauma, where do you go next? Things like that. And we wanted to consolidate it all in one place. We wanted to make sure it was secure and anonymous because, drawing again on my own time in the military, I didn't trust a lot of government resources because, you'd think that you were tracked, and sometimes you were, especially if you had to sign in to use it. You didn't want your bosses finding out if you were looking up something you thought you'd get judged on. So the idea was to create a website with a trauma-informed design that would provide all this information in one easy, accessible place for these folks.
I have so many questions, but I'm gonna just jump back to something you said that I find really concerning, that 80% of women in the military don't know about the resources and how they can access women's health care. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a multifactorial issue. Again, the military trains on almost everything through death by PowerPoint, and this isn't considered as high of a priority. Some of that's because women only make up about 20% of the force. Some of it's due to a very, macho dominated culture where, even when I was in, I myself didn't think too much about women's health unless I was going for, my mandatory pap smear, or if, I broke my finger and they were like, you need a P test because you might be pregnant. And I was like, I'm here for a broken finger. I just want the x-ray. I promise you I'm not pregnant. But they put you through the whole rigmarole. So I think it's not a priority. And then when it comes to women's health specifically, there is no parallel for the healthcare offered to men where they are forbidden from having coverage for, a health issue. And I do feel that abortion is kind of the new don't ask, don't tell in the military, especially based on the research I've been doing, where the priority for a lot of my research participants and the responses we've been getting isn't so much about how am I going to pay and, what am I going to do? It's all about like, how do I access this care without my leadership finding out? Because there are credible stories of women who've been punished for going to get care, or they know the policy for convalescent leave means they're supposed to have a week off and they're denied that by their first sergeant or their commander. The other thing that complicates access to women's health in the military is it's, again, with no parallel to the men. If you look at just birth control, a provider can tell you that they're not going to give you birth control because it's against their religious beliefs. And that might be the only provider on base who provides women's health care, because there is such a shortage of women's healthcare providers that first these ladies have to go to their primary care manager. And if their primary care manager isn't comfortable prescribing birth control, they have to get a referral to women's health, which can take quite a long time in some cases. We're talking weeks or months. And then birth control is only given for 3 months. And, you move around a lot in the military through PCS or you deploy, and they won't give you enough to cover you for that move or that deployment. So it's it's a bit of a mess. It's very subjective. For example, before I deployed, my buddy and I both went, to our pre-deployment checkup, and she had one provider, I had another, and she had endometriosis. So she'd been on birth control a long time to help with the pain and the bleeding. And her provider told her, I'm not going to give you a prescription for birth control because you're married and he's not with you overseas, and I don't want to tempt you to sin. And my provider, and understand in this context, he was an awkward ally because I've had people get angry at this story. He was like, do you need birth control? And I was like, yeah, I don't need it. My husband's not there. I'm not going to be doing anything. It's fine. And he looks at me and in all sincerity is like, well, what are you going to do when you get raped? So the fact that you've got those two polar opposites at the same base, at the same clinic, that is the story of women's healthcare in the military. It's very, very subjective, and it is considered acceptable for us to be denied care based on the whims of the provider that we're seeing.
I mean, this just really highlights the importance of one, the work that you're doing, but two, I mean, as a civilian, I didn't know any of this was happening in the military. And so, I mean, I just want to thank you and Holly for the work you're doing on putting this together for the women in the military, but also, to spreading more light on these issues because again, I don't know that many people know that this is what women in the military have to go through just to access reproductive health care.
I agree. There definitely is a civilian military knowledge gap in that, but I've also found that as I've talked to more providers, the light goes on. When they hear about mileage passes or the subjectivity of care, or just, hey, we don't get a second opinion the way that a civilian can, the light goes on and they kind of have a better understanding of the urgency and the importance and the special needs that this population has.
Where are you at with the app? When do you feel like it's going to be ready to deploy out to women in the military?
We're getting ready to enter our soft and beta testing phase to make sure that it operates correctly and that the way we've written the content is hitting the mark with our intended audience in the next 6 weeks. And then we're hoping to do the full launch no later than April, which
Well,
is
that's
good because they've already started changing the policies that we were trying to highlight. So I would not be surprised if there's more changes before April. So that will give us the opportunity to have the most up-to-date information on the website before it goes live.
well, and that was going to be my next question. How has the new administration made you either rethink or plan differently for the content that you're providing and how you get it out to women in the military?
So the only pivot that we've made is we are we slowed our roll on the policy content because we anticipated that they were going to start repealing some of these policies. And sure enough, about 2 weeks ago, the DoD rescinded the travel policy for non-covered reproductive health care, which only covered abortion and infertility. And they did it very quietly. They did not alert anybody in Congress. And then the story broke about 2 days later. And there's been a really wonderful response from, folks like Senator Shaheen, who's the one who the Shaheen Amendment is what added rape and incest coverage to TRICARE, the military health insurance in 2013. And folks like, Representative Chrissy Houlihan, who's an Air Force veteran herself. So it's been heartening to see that people are fighting back on this. Earlier this week, the DoD pivoted again and sent out another memo saying, we didn't mean infertility care. You can still go get your infertility care, although we know that when the original memo was published, there were folks who had been approved to travel and that permission was rescinded. So they're definitely trying to reverse some of the progress that has been made. Again, the Department of Justice released a statement when the travel policy was put through saying that this meets Hyde Amendment criteria and is perfectly legal. But this administration has an agenda, and I think that they will continue to try to dismantle some of the protections that were put in place for servicewomen trying to access abortion care. There was recently a ProRepublica piece on a Coast Guard officer who almost died because they were going back and forth on, well, she's miscarrying, but there's still a fetal heartbeat. We won't cover it. There's stories my participants have that are very similar to that. And I think it's a shame that the administration is willing to play games with the lives of the women who volunteer to serve this country and just do an outstanding job doing so. It's political posturing, and in my opinion, that has no place in the military and it has no place in healthcare.
I couldn't agree more. It has no place in this country, really. It really does show the importance of the work that you're doing both on the research end, but also with this innovation project. So I really want to thank you, Kat, for taking time to share your experiences with us, educating those of us who are civilians on what's going on in the military for the women serving, and all the work you're doing to amplify that. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity you guys have given us. Again, based on our initial research about the website, a lot of servicewomen appreciate it as well, and everything that the accelerators allowed us to do. And thank you for having me today.
Hello, Angela.
Marion, it is lovely to see you.
We're back. It's been so long, I've missed you.
I know, I've missed you too.
This is season 10 of the Amplify Nursing podcast, which is a little mind-blowing, but we're also doing this really cool thing this season with our Penn Nursing magazine colleagues. We're going to be highlighting stories in the magazine so that we can give a little more breadth and depth to some of the topics, which I think is really cool. And this episode really highlights, I think, the importance of giving voice to some of these topics in a more deeper way.
I totally agree. I'm really excited about this collaboration. I think it'll provide a great opportunity for people to really connect with the information that they're getting and all the great things that we're doing.
Yeah, and especially talking with Kat about the incredibly important work that she's doing with Dr. Holly Harner with their platform called Camo Care. And God, I learned so much as a civilian. There's so much going on in the military that we have no idea about. And some of the biases and restrictions, it's really interesting and a little bit frustrating, I must say. I was really getting a little bit frustrated on behalf of service women.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I was listening to the interview, it struck me that these are people who voluntarily commit their lives to the service of our country, and they have the least ability to exercise their freedoms than anyone else. And I found that incredibly, incredibly sad. And, we're doing them such a huge disservice. And we were talking specifically here about service women and healthcare for women, but I can't imagine it's even a whole lot better for the men either. And, I think it's something that it's really important to bring light to and allow everyone to realize like the profound sacrifice that they're making.
Totally. And, Kat was saying this doesn't just affect women, right? Like it affects their spouses and partners. And, it's not just about getting abortion care. It's really like the full range of reproductive women's health.
Yeah.
And to your point, these women are volunteering their service for this country. And, the least this country can do is provide them with the quality healthcare they need. And so I am was so honored to be able to have our Innovation Accelerator support the work that Kat and Holly are doing to bring this vital resource to the women of our military because it is so desperately needed.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was really, really impressed with the fact that she's utilizing her life experience and expounding upon her life experience in order to solve real life problems that are happening. I find that to be super exciting. And I think that we really hopefully will start to see more of that in the research that we do, and not just looking at very esoteric topics that are kind of out there and very academic. This is a really, really practical and solvable solution if somebody wants to sit down and really tackle it.
Nurses, man, that's what we do. And I know innovation is like this nebulous term that no one understands, but this is innovation. Like this is the human-centered approach of understanding the experiences of your population and then designing a solution that really addresses what they need in a way that is safe and effective and meets them where they're at. And Kat and Holly are really doing that through our innovation accelerator, but well beyond that. Like, this is really such a resource for all of the women in the military. And again, like, really just so honored to be able to play a small part in that, in being able to fund something like this.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marion Leary and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing, with special thanks to Jonathan Zhu for his assistance. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Follow us on Twitter at Penn Nursing. Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through. We want to thank you for listening to the Amplify Nursing podcast and remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening. And if you can do us a solid, please rate and review us as well. It will go a long way in amplifying our episodes.